Flight 237 plummets toward the Atlantic Ocean. Both engines gone. All hydraulic systems failed. The pilot announces the unthinkable, "We are going down." 215 souls face certain death. Then a small voice cuts through the chaos, "I can fly this plane." A child steps into the cockpit with knowledge no child should possess. An impossible rescue begins. Sometimes miracles wear sneakers and speak with unwavering confidence. Before you watch full story, comment below from which country are you watching. Don't forget to subscribe for more amazing stories. The Boeing 777 cut through the night sky like a silver arrow, its twin engines humming steadily as it cruised at 38,000 feet above the dark Atlantic Ocean. Flight 237, heading from New York to London, carried 215 passengers through the peaceful darkness. Most were sleeping under thin blankets, others watched movies on their seat screens, and a few read books by the soft glow of overhead lights. The flight attendants moved quietly through the cabin, offering water and checking on passengers. Everything was perfectly normal, or so it seemed. Captain James Morrison sat in the left seat of the cockpit, his experienced eyes scanning the instruments with the casual expertise of someone who had done this thousands of times before. At 48 years old, with 22 years of commercial flying experience and over 15,000 flight hours, Morrison had become so accustomed to flying that it felt as natural as breathing. He was a devoted husband and father of 3 children, Michael, Emma, and little Sophie, who were sleeping peacefully at home in New York. First Officer Lisa Chen occupied the right seat, monitoring her own array of instruments with practiced efficiency. At 38 years old and with 12 years of experience, she had logged 8,000 flight hours. Together, they formed a skilled, experienced team who had flown together many times and trusted each other completely. "Coffee?" Lisa offered, holding up a thermos with a smile. "Sure, thanks," Morrison replied, accepting the cup gratefully. Through the cockpit windows, they could see millions of stars shining brilliantly against the black sky. Far below, the Atlantic Ocean stretched endlessly, dark and mysterious. The weather forecast was perfect. There were no storms in the area. Everything looked ideal for a routine, uneventful flight. Neither pilot had any idea that in the next 60 seconds, their world would transform into a nightmare that would test every ounce of their training and push them beyond what they thought was humanly possible. Boom! The explosion was massive and terrifying. It came from somewhere behind and below them, shaking the entire aircraft violently. This wasn't turbulence or a small bump, this was a catastrophic explosion that sent violent vibrations through every part of the airplane. Red warning lights suddenly flashed across every screen in the cockpit. Multiple alarms wailed and beeped loudly. The smell of smoke and burning metal filled the air. The peaceful, quiet cockpit transformed instantly into absolute chaos. "What the hell was that?" Lisa shouted, her coffee cup falling from her hands and spilling across the floor. Her hands flew frantically across the instrument panel, checking systems desperately. Captain Morrison's eyes moved quickly across his screens, reading the cascade of failure messages appearing everywhere. His face went pale as he processed the information. His hands began trembling slightly. "Engine number 1 is completely gone," he said, his voice tight with stress. "Total failure. Complete loss. And look, engine number 2 is showing critical damage. Temperature is rising fast into the red zone. Can we restart engine 1? Lisa asked urgently. "Negative. It's completely dead. No response at all from any systems." Morrison's voice was professional and controlled, but his hands were shaking visibly. "And engine 2 is overheating badly. The temperature is way past safe operational limits." Before Lisa could respond, the second engine made a horrible grinding, tearing noise. It sounded like metal being ripped apart from inside. The entire airplane shuddered violently. In the cabin, passengers started screaming in fear. "We're losing engine 2. Lisa yelled, her voice rising with panic. "Shut it down immediately before it explodes and takes the entire wing with it." Morrison commanded, his training taking over despite the terror inside him. Lisa's hand slammed down hard on the emergency shutdown switch. The second engine went silent, its terrible grinding noise stopping abruptly. Now they were flying a 300-ton Boeing 777 with absolutely no engines. Both were completely dead and useless. They were gliding through the air like a giant stone, descending at a steady rate. Without engine power, they had maybe 15 to 18 minutes before hitting the ocean far below. But then things got worse. "Captain, I'm getting absolutely no response from the flight controls," Lisa said, pulling back hard on her control stick. Nothing happened. The stick moved freely in her hand, but the airplane didn't respond in any way. "The hydraulic systems are not responding. None of them are working." Morrison grabbed his own control stick and pulled desperately. It moved easily in his hands, but felt like it wasn't connected to anything, like a video game controller unplugged from the console. "All three hydraulic systems are showing zero pressure," he said quietly, his voice hollow with shock. "We have no flight controls at all. No engines. No hydraulics. Nothing. This airplane is completely unflyable. We have no way to control it." They looked at each other across the cockpit. Their eyes met, and in that moment, they both understood exactly what this meant. They were going to die. Everyone on this airplane was going to die. Morrison's mind struggled to accept what was happening. In 22 years of flying, he had trained for countless emergency scenarios. He had practiced engine failures. He had practiced hydraulic failures. But never, ever had he trained for both happening simultaneously. It was supposed to be statistically impossible. He looked at the altimeter. They were at 37,000 feet and descending steadily at approximately 2,000 feet per minute. Simple mathematics told him they had about 18 minutes before hitting the water. 18 minutes left to live. 18 minutes before 215 people died. He thought about his wife, Sarah, waiting at home. He thought about his children. Michael was 14. Emma was 11. Little Sophie was only 7 years old. He would never see them again. He would never hug them or tell them he loved them one more time. His hand trembled as he picked up the intercom microphone. This would be the hardest thing he had ever said in his entire life. "Ladies and gentlemen, this is the captain speaking." In the cabin, passengers looked up from their books, movies, and sleep. They sensed something was wrong from the captain's tone. "We have experienced catastrophic failure of both engines and all flight control systems," Morrison said slowly and clearly. Gasps filled the cabin. "We have lost the ability to fly this aircraft. I repeat, we cannot control the airplane anymore." Someone screamed. A man said loudly, "Oh my God, no." Morrison's voice broke as he spoke the words he never imagined saying, "I need to be completely honest with you. We are going down. We cannot recover from this situation. There is nothing we can do to save this aircraft. Please secure your seatbelts tightly. Put your heads down in the brace position. Follow all instructions from the flight attendants. I am so deeply, deeply sorry. We are going down. May God have mercy on all of us." The cabin exploded into absolute chaos and pure terror. People started crying hysterically, screaming, praying desperately in multiple languages. Parents grabbed their young children and held them tight, crying into their hair. Strangers held each other's hands, seeking comfort from anyone. A businessman in first class called his wife on his cell phone, his voice breaking as he said goodbye. A young woman wrote a frantic goodbye message on paper, her tears smudging the ink. An elderly couple held hands and prayed together, preparing to meet their maker. The flight attendants moved through the cabin trying to help people get into emergency brace positions, but many were crying themselves. They all knew that when they hit the ocean at this speed and height, the impact would be so violent that it would kill everyone instantly. "We're all going to die," someone sobbed loudly. "Oh God, we're all going to die." In seat 14C, near the middle section of the airplane, a small 12-year-old girl with dark hair and serious brown eyes sat very still and quiet. Her name was Sofia Martinez. While absolutely everyone around her was panicking and preparing themselves to die, she was sitting calmly with her hands folded in her lap, thinking clearly and analytically. Sofia was not like other children her age. She didn't spend her time on social media or video games. Sofia lived and breathed aviation. It was in her blood, in her DNA, passed down directly from her father. Her father had been Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo Martinez, a United States Air Force test pilot. He had been one of the absolute best pilots in the entire military. He tested experimental aircraft and pushed them to their extreme limits. He flew planes that scared most other pilots. He tested systems that nobody had tested before. He was brilliant, brave, fearless, and absolutely dedicated to aviation safety. But 2 years ago, when Sofia was only 10 years old, her beloved father had died in a test flight accident. An experimental aircraft he was testing had suffered a catastrophic structural failure at high altitude. The plane had broken apart in mid-air. Her father hadn't had enough time to eject. He was killed instantly. Sofia's mother had died when Sofia was only 4 years old, losing a battle with cancer. So when her father died, Sofia became a complete orphan at age 10. She went to live with her grandmother in New York. Her grandmother was kind and loving, but she didn't understand Sofia's intense obsession with aviation. But Sofia couldn't help it. Aviation was what connected her to her father. It was their shared language, their special bond. Every time she studied flight, she felt close to him again. From the age of 6, Sofia had spent every weekend in professional flight simulators with her father. He had access to military-grade flight simulators at the Air Force Base, and he would take his daughter there for hours of intensive training. He didn't teach her like she was a child playing a game. He taught her like a real pilot in serious training. He showed her how to read complex instruments, understand weather patterns, calculate fuel consumption, and optimize flight paths. He taught her the physics of flight, how lift, drag, thrust, and weight interact to keep an airplane in the air. He taught her exactly how engines work, how hydraulic systems function, how electrical systems are designed with redundancies. Most importantly, he taught her how to handle emergency situations when everything goes wrong. He would create nightmare scenarios in the simulator. He would make both engines fail at the same time. He would make all hydraulic systems fail. He would create fires, depressurization events, structural damage. He would combine multiple catastrophic failures simultaneously, creating situations that most professional pilots with decades of experience never face in their entire careers. Sofia, her father would say in his serious military voice, the difference between a good pilot and a truly great pilot is what they do when absolutely everything goes wrong. Anyone can fly when all systems work normally and weather is good. That's easy. But can you fly when both engines quit? Can you fly when you lose your controls? Can you stay calm and think clearly when everyone else would panic? That's what separates the best pilots from all the rest. He made her practice these nightmare scenarios hundreds of times. At first, she would panic every time and crash within seconds. But slowly, over months and years of practice, she learned to stay calm under extreme pressure. She learned to think clearly and logically when her heart was pounding and adrenaline flooded her system. She learned to look for creative, unconventional solutions when standard procedures didn't work. Why do we practice these impossible situations so much, Papa? Sofia had asked him once after a particularly difficult session. Her father had stopped the simulator, turned to her, knelt down to her level, put both his hands gently on her small shoulders, and looked at her with completely serious eyes. Because someday, somewhere, the impossible will happen to someone, he said quietly but firmly. Some pilot, somewhere in the world, will face a situation that's not supposed to happen according to statistics. A combination of failures that everyone says is impossible. And if that pilot has never trained for it, they will freeze up, panic, and die. And everyone on their airplane will die with them. He paused, then continued, but if that pilot has trained for the impossible, if they've practiced creative solutions, they have a chance. Maybe only a 1% chance, but even a tiny chance is infinitely better than no chance at all. Do you understand? Sophia had nodded seriously. I understand, Papa. Good, her father had said, smiling warmly and ruffling her hair. Because I truly believe you're going to be an amazing pilot someday. Better than me. Better than anyone I know. That conversation had happened just 3 months before he died. Now, sitting in seat 14C on Flight 237, Sophia heard the captain's devastating announcement that everyone was going to die. She heard the absolute panic erupting all around her. She saw people crying hysterically and hugging goodbye, preparing for death. But instead of panicking, Sophia's mind shifted into the analytical, problem-solving mode that her father had spent 6 intensive years training into her very core. It was like flipping a switch in her brain. She thought systematically about what the captain had said, catastrophic failure of both engines and all flight control systems. Her mind analyzed the situation. Dual-engine failure was very rare but not impossible. The famous Gimli glider incident in 1983 had lost both engines over Canada and had glided successfully to a safe landing. U.S. Airways Flight 1549 in 2009 had lost both engines after hitting geese and had landed safely on the Hudson River with no fatalities. Total hydraulic failure was extremely rare but also possible. United Airlines Flight 232 in 1989 had lost all 3 independent hydraulic systems over Iowa, but pilots had managed to maintain control by using differential engine thrust alone. But dual-engine failure and total hydraulic failure at exactly the same time? That was supposed to be statistically impossible. Most people, including most experienced pilots, would think, it's over. There's absolutely no hope. We're all going to die. But Sophia didn't think that way. Her father had trained her to think differently. She thought, what would Papa do? What creative solution would he find? What system or technique would he use that others haven't thought of? Her father's voice echoed clearly in her memory, as if he were sitting right next to her. If you ever face a situation where all the adults have given up completely, where everyone thinks there's absolutely no solution possible, that's exactly when you need to speak up loudly. Because sometimes fresh eyes see answers that experienced eyes miss completely. Sometimes a different perspective finds a solution that everyone else overlooked. Don't ever let anyone silence you just because you're young. Sophia made a decision in that moment. She stood up calmly and decisively. The woman sitting next to her, a businesswoman in her 40s who had been crying hysterically, suddenly grabbed Sophia's arm hard. Sit down. Where do you think you're going? We need to brace for impact. Sit down right now. I'm going to the cockpit, Sophia said calmly and clearly, her voice completely steady. The woman stared at her like she had lost her mind. What? Are you insane? You're just a child. There's nothing you can do. Sit down and pray with the rest of us. But Sophia gently but firmly pulled her arm free and started walking purposefully toward the front of the airplane. She walked calmly and steadily through absolute chaos. People stared at her as she passed. They couldn't understand why a small child was walking so calmly while every single adult around her was completely falling apart. She reached the front section where several flight attendants were gathered near the locked cockpit door. One was a man named David, about 30 years old, who had been a flight attendant for 8 years. His face was red and swollen from crying. David saw Sophia approaching and quickly stepped in front of her, blocking her path. Sweetheart, you need to go back to your seat right now. You need to sit down and get into the brace position like everyone else. I need to speak to the pilots immediately, Sophia said. Her voice was clear, strong, steady, and absolutely calm. There was no fear in it. Just pure determination and confidence. David shook his head firmly. That's completely impossible, honey. The cockpit door is locked for security reasons. Nobody is allowed in there during flight. And the pilots are very, very busy right now trying to. He stopped mid-sentence, his voice breaking. Trying to do what? There was nothing they could do. My father was Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo Martinez, United States Air Force test pilot, Sophia said, looking David directly in the eyes with an intense, unwavering gaze. He taught me how to fly airplanes for 6 years. He taught me advanced emergency procedures that most commercial pilots never learn. I've logged over 400 hours in professional military flight simulators. I've trained specifically for this exact type of emergency scenario multiple times. I know how to save this airplane and everyone on it. You need to open the cockpit door right now. David stared at her in complete shock. A 12-year-old girl was standing here confidently claiming she could save the airplane. It was absolutely insane. It was impossible. It made no sense at all. But something about her stopped him from immediately dismissing her. Something in her eyes was different. She didn't look like a terrified, confused child. She didn't look like someone in denial or shock. She looked like a military officer giving orders. Her eyes were clear, focused, and determined. Her voice was steady and confident. Her body language radiated competence and authority. And the brutal truth was that they were all going to die anyway in about 15 minutes. What possible harm could it do to let her talk to the pilots for 30 seconds? Are you completely serious right now? David asked. Completely serious, Sophia said firmly, never breaking eye contact. We have approximately 14 minutes before we hit the ocean surface and everyone dies. You can spend those precious minutes arguing with me about whether I'm too young or whether this makes sense, or you can open that door right now and let me try to save 215 lives. Which option do you choose? David made a split-second decision based on pure instinct. He turned and knocked on the cockpit door using the special emergency code pattern. Inside the cockpit, Captain Morrison and Lisa were going through their emergency checklists for the 10th time, even though they both knew with absolute certainty that it was completely hopeless. When they heard the emergency knock, Morrison reached over and unlocked the door. What is it, David? He asked in an exhausted, defeated voice. Captain, sir, there's a young girl out here. She says she can help. She says her father was a military test pilot and... What? No. Morrison interrupted angrily. Absolutely not. We don't have time for this. Tell her to go back to her seat right now. But Sophia didn't wait for permission. She pushed firmly past David and stepped directly into the cockpit. Both pilots turned to look at her. They saw a tiny 12-year-old girl, barely 5 feet tall, very thin, with dark hair in a simple ponytail, wearing casual jeans and a t-shirt. She looked like she should be in a middle school classroom, not in the cockpit of a dying commercial airliner. You need to leave this cockpit immediately, Morrison said firmly and angrily. This area is not safe for passengers. Go back to your seat right now, young lady. That's an order. Sophia looked him directly in the eyes without any fear and said clearly, loudly, and with absolute confidence. I can fly this plane. The cockpit went completely silent except for the warning alarm still beeping. Morrison stared at her in disbelief. What did you just say? Sophia didn't blink. She kept her eyes locked firmly on his and repeated her statement even more clearly and forcefully. I can fly this aircraft. I can save everyone. Let me help you. Lisa let out a short, slightly hysterical laugh that was half disbelief and half desperation. Kid, listen, I really appreciate whatever you're trying to do here, but we're professional pilots with decades of combined experience, and we can't fly this plane. Both engines are completely dead. All 3 independent hydraulic systems have totally failed. This aircraft is literally unflyable. It cannot be flown. Not unflyable, Sophia corrected calmly and matter-of-factly. Just not flyable using standard procedures and conventional techniques that you learned in normal commercial pilot training. Morrison shook his head in frustration. Look, I don't know who you are, but you need to leave this cockpit immediately, Anne. My name is Sofia Martinez, she interrupted with complete authority. My father was Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo Martinez, United States Air Force test pilot. Before he died 2 years ago, he spent 6 intensive years teaching me advanced emergency procedures and unconventional recovery techniques that most commercial pilots never learn because they're not in the standard training curriculum. I've personally logged over 400 hours in military-grade professional flight simulators. I've practiced dual-engine failure combined with total hydraulic loss 16 separate times in those simulators. I know techniques, backup systems, and approaches that aren't in your commercial pilot training manual. Both pilots froze completely and stared at her with wide eyes. Ricardo Martinez was your father? Lisa whispered, her eyes going very wide with recognition. The Ricardo Martinez? The legendary test pilot? You knew him? Sophia asked. I met him once at a major aviation safety conference in Dallas about 5 years ago, Lisa said, her voice filled with awe and sadness. He gave a presentation on unconventional emergency recovery techniques. He was absolutely legendary in the aviation community. Everyone knew his name. He was working on experimental systems for recovering from catastrophic multiple system failures. Everyone said he was an absolute genius, that he thought about flying in ways nobody else did. Yes, Sophia said simply. And he taught me absolutely everything he knew. He made me practice scenarios that commercial pilots never practice because they're considered too statistically unlikely. But Papa always said that unlikely doesn't mean impossible, and someone needs to be prepared for when it actually happens. Captain Morrison desperately wanted to dismiss her immediately. She was just a child, for God's sake. How could she possibly help them? It was absurd. But they had less than 13 minutes before impact. He had personally tried absolutely everything he knew. Nothing had worked. They were going to crash and everyone was going to die. That was absolutely certain. What did he possibly have to lose by listening to her for 30 seconds? If she was wrong, they'd die anyway. But if she actually knew something he didn't. What exactly are you suggesting we do? He asked carefully. Sophia stepped closer to the main instrument panel and looked quickly at all the displays. Her eyes moved rapidly across the screens, analyzing the situation with practiced efficiency. You still have the APU running, correct? She asked, using the technical acronym without hesitation. The auxiliary power unit? Yes, Lisa answered, surprised by the technical precision. It's currently providing electrical power to all the instruments. But it's just a tiny turbine engine in the tail section. It's way too small and weak to actually power this aircraft through the air. It produces thrust, Sophia stated. Approximately 1,100 pounds of thrust at maximum output. That's not much compared to the main engines, but it's definitely not zero. And it's mounted in the tail section, which means its thrust vector can be used to influence pitch control if we're very careful, very precise, and very smart about how we use it. Morrison felt a tiny flicker of hope start to ignite in his chest for the first time since this nightmare began. Even if we could somehow use the APU's minimal thrust for pitch control, we still desperately need to control roll and yaw. We need to keep the wings level. We need to steer the aircraft. Without hydraulic pressure, none of the flight control surfaces will move. The ailerons, the elevators, the rudder, they're all hydraulically actuated. Without hydraulic pressure, they're frozen in place. The aircraft has emergency backup systems that almost nobody knows about because they're almost never used, Sophia said quickly and confidently, speaking faster because she knew time was critical. There's an emergency pneumatic system, high-pressure compressed air stored in reinforced tanks, that can temporarily power the hydraulic actuators when all primary, secondary, and tertiary hydraulic systems have failed. It's designed as an absolute last-resort emergency backup system for exactly this type of scenario. It only provides approximately 70 seconds of hydraulic pressure before the compressed air supply is exhausted, but if we use those 70 seconds at exactly the right moment with perfect timing and precision, we can generate enough control authority to significantly reduce our descent rate and level the wings properly for a controlled water landing. Lisa was already frantically pulling up emergency systems diagrams on her display screen. Her fingers flew across the touch screen, navigating through complex menus. "She's absolutely right," Lisa said, her voice filled with shock. "There is an emergency pneumatic backup system. It's listed right here in the technical specifications. I've been flying 777s for 8 years and I've literally never even heard of this system existing. That's because it's buried very deep in the technical manuals in an appendix section that most pilots never read," Sophia explained. "It's never mentioned in standard commercial pilot training programs because the specific scenario where you'd need it is supposed to be statistically impossible. But my papa made me memorize every single backup system, every emergency procedure, every hidden capability of every major commercial aircraft type." Captain Morrison looked at his altimeter. They were at 23,000 feet now and descending steadily. He calculated quickly, they had maybe 10 to 11 minutes maximum before hitting the ocean surface. This tiny 12-year-old girl was talking about complex systems he barely knew existed. She was using highly technical terminology correctly and precisely. She understood aircraft systems at a level that most commercial pilots with decades of experience didn't. And she had been personally trained for 6 years by Ricardo Martinez, an absolute legend in the aviation safety community. But she was 12 years old. Just a child. Could he really put 215 lives in her hands? Then again, he had already announced to everyone that they were going down, that there was no hope. Everyone had completely given up hope of survival. If they did absolutely nothing, they would crash into the ocean and everyone would die. 100% certain. If they tried this girl's idea and it didn't work, they would still crash and everyone would still die. Same result. But if they tried her idea and it actually worked, even partially, they might have a small chance of survival. Even a 1% chance was infinitely better than 0% chance. Captain Morrison made a decision in that moment that would either save everyone or be remembered as his last decision ever. "Okay," he said suddenly, his voice firm and decisive. "Okay, we'll try it. Lisa, work with her on the systems. I'll monitor everything and provide backup support." "Captain, are you absolutely sure about this?" Lisa asked, her eyes wide with uncertainty. "We're all dead anyway if we do nothing," Morrison said bluntly. "If this kid knows something we don't, something that might give us even a tiny chance, we have to try it. We have absolutely nothing to lose at this point." He looked directly at Sophia. "What do you need us to do?" "First, I need to sit in the captain's seat," Sophia said with complete confidence. Morrison unbuckled his seatbelt immediately and stood up. Sophia climbed into the captain's chair, her small frame barely filling the large seat. She looked almost impossibly small sitting there, but her eyes were sharp, focused, and absolutely determined. As Morrison and Lisa watched in amazement, this 12-year-old girl placed her small hands on the control stick and took a deep breath. "All right," Sophia said, her voice calm and steady. "Let's go to work. We have less than 10 minutes to save this airplane. First Officer Chen, I need you to access the emergency pneumatic system panel and initiate the startup sequence. Captain Morrison, monitor the APU output and let me know the moment we start getting any thrust response. I'm going to use the APU thrust vector to begin pitch control." And with that, Sofia Martinez, a girl who, just moments before, had been given up for dead along with everyone else on Flight 237, began executing the most complex, dangerous, and remarkable emergency procedures ever attempted in commercial aviation history. "APU thrust is responding," Lisa called out, her eyes fixed on the readouts. "We're getting approximately 900 pounds of thrust. It's not stable yet, but it's there." "Good," Sophia said, her small hands making micro-adjustments to the control stick. "Gentle pressure. We need to use this thrust to adjust our pitch angle incrementally. Captain Morrison, what's our current descent rate? 2,100 feet per minute and climbing, Morrison said, his eyes scanning the instruments. We're losing altitude faster now. That's expected, Sophia replied with remarkable composure. The APU thrust is fighting against gravity, but we haven't activated the emergency pneumatic system yet. First Officer Chen, activate the pneumatic system now. We're at 21,000 feet. We need to use those precious 70 seconds wisely. Lisa's hands moved across the panels with practiced urgency. She found the emergency pneumatic system activation sequence that she had never known existed until moments ago. With a deep breath, she executed the commands. There was a sudden hiss throughout the aircraft, a sound like compressed air being released, and suddenly, the control surfaces began to respond. The hydraulic actuators, powered by the emergency pneumatic system instead of the normal hydraulic pressure, came to life. We have hydraulic response. Lisa exclaimed. The ailerons are responding. The elevators are responding. Excellent, Sophia said, making careful, measured adjustments to the control stick. Now we need to level the wings and reduce our descent rate. Captain, help me with the rudder pedals. We need gentle, coordinated inputs. This is like dancing, too much input and we'll stall. Too little and we won't accomplish anything. Morrison, despite his 50 years of experience and the shock of taking orders from a child, moved to help. Together, they made minute adjustments to the aircraft's trajectory. The airplane's nose began to rise slightly. The descent rate, which had been increasing steadily, began to slow. 19,000 feet. 18,500 feet. The rate of descent was decreasing. We're working. Morrison breathed, hardly believing what he was witnessing. We're actually controlling the descent. Stay focused, Sophia said calmly. We have about 45 seconds of pneumatic pressure left. We need to get the wings level and establish a gentle descent angle that will allow us to reach the water with minimum impact velocity. First Officer Chen, calculate our current trajectory and project where we'll splash down. Lisa's fingers flew across the keyboard. If we maintain this descent angle, we'll be approximately 120 nautical miles northeast of the nearest shipping lanes. The water is relatively calm in that area. Good, Sophia said. That gives rescue services time to reach us. Now, both of you, we need to coordinate one more time. When the pneumatic pressure runs out, we'll lose the hydraulic response, but we'll still have the APU thrust for pitch control and the natural aerodynamic effects of our wing position. We need to be in the absolute best configuration possible at that moment. The seconds ticked by. 15,000 feet. The descent rate continued to slow. Sophia's small hands remained steady on the control stick, making tiny, precise adjustments. Sweat beaded on her forehead, but her voice remained absolutely calm and controlled. 10 seconds of pneumatic pressure remaining, Lisa announced, watching the pressure gauge drop steadily. Prepare for loss of hydraulic response in 3, 2, 1, mark, Sophia said. The hiss of the pneumatic system faded. The hydraulic response ceased. But Sophia had positioned the aircraft perfectly. The wings were level. The nose was at exactly the right angle. They were descending at a manageable rate toward the Atlantic Ocean. Ladies and gentlemen, this is Captain Morrison, Morrison said into the radio, his voice steady and professional, addressing the terrified passengers and the rescue services that were now scrambling to help them. We have regained partial control of the aircraft. We are executing an emergency water landing. We will be touching down in approximately 4 minutes. All crew, prepare passengers for water landing procedures. This is not a drill. We will make it. Have faith. In the cabin, passengers who had been crying and praying suddenly heard something they didn't think was possible: hope. Real, tangible hope. The ocean surface grew closer. Sophia's heart pounded, but her hands remained steady on the control stick. 3,000 feet, Lisa announced. Descent rate holding at 800 feet per minute. Perfect for a water landing. Flight attendants, prepare for water landing, Morrison commanded. Brace positions, everyone. The flight attendants moved quickly through the cabin. Instead of terror, there was determination. Hope had replaced despair. 1,000 feet. 500 feet. 200 feet. Brace for impact. Morrison shouted. The Boeing 777's belly touched the water with tremendous force. The impact was violent, but Sophia had positioned the aircraft at the optimal angle. The aircraft hit at a shallow angle, its wings level, its fuselage intact. They were floating. The Boeing 777, an aircraft that had been falling from the sky with both engines dead and all hydraulic systems failed, was now floating intact on the Atlantic Ocean. For a moment, there was absolute silence. Then someone screamed, not in terror, but in joy. We made it. Oh my God, we made it. We're alive. The entire cabin erupted. People hugged each other, crying tears of joy. Mothers embraced their children. Strangers held each other. A businessman was laughing and crying, calling his wife. In the cockpit, Morrison turned to look at Sophia. Tears streamed down his face. Sophia, he said, his voice thick with emotion, you saved us. You saved all of us. Lisa was already radioing to the rescue services. This is Flight 237. We have successfully ditched in the Atlantic Ocean. Aircraft is floating. All 215 passengers and crew appear to be alive and accounted for. We require immediate rescue assistance. Repeat, all souls on board are alive. The response came immediately, Flight 237, this is Coast Guard rescue operations. We have vessels and helicopters en route to your location. Estimated arrival time, 15 minutes. Congratulations on the incredible landing. You are already a legend. The next hours were a blur of activity. Rescue ships and helicopters arrived quickly. One by one, passengers were carefully evacuated from the aircraft into lifeboats. The flight attendants worked tirelessly to help everyone, and not a single person was lost. Captain Morrison ensured that Sophia was among the first evacuated. As she climbed into the lifeboat, the crew members who had watched her work in the cockpit applauded her. Passengers who had been crying and preparing to die just an hour ago were now cheering and thanking her. Sophia remained humble and quiet through it all. She knew that what she had done was extraordinary, but in her mind, she had simply done what her father had trained her to do. She had solved a problem that others couldn't solve. She had stayed calm when everyone else panicked. She had used her knowledge and training to save lives. When the rescue ships reached the nearest port in Halifax, Nova Scotia, Sophia was immediately taken to a hospital for a medical evaluation. She was exhausted but physically unharmed. The doctors declared her in perfect health, just tired. News of the incredible rescue spread around the world like wildfire. The story of a 12-year-old girl who had walked into the cockpit of a dying airplane and saved everyone on board captivated the hearts of millions. Media outlets called her a hero, a genius, a miracle. Within hours, her name was known in every country on Earth. But Sophia's greatest moment came 2 days later, at the Halifax airport, when her grandmother arrived. The elderly woman had been watching the news in New York, terrified, not knowing if her granddaughter had survived the crash. When she saw Sophia alive and smiling, she rushed forward and gathered her into her arms, crying tears of joy and relief. "Oh my darling, my sweet Sophia," her grandmother said, holding her tight. "I was so scared. I thought I had lost you too." "I'm okay, Grandma," Sophia said softly. "Papa taught me what to do." Captain Morrison was there at the airport as well. When he saw Sophia with her grandmother, he approached them respectfully. "Mrs. Martinez," he said to Sophia's grandmother, "I wanted to thank you for raising such an extraordinary granddaughter. Your son, Sophia's father, would be incredibly proud of what she accomplished. She saved 215 lives. She saved my life. She saved everyone on that plane. Sophia's grandmother looked at her granddaughter with new understanding and pride. She had never fully comprehended the depth of Sophia's knowledge and skill, never understood why her granddaughter was so obsessed with aviation. But now she understood completely. Yes, she said softly, Ricardo would be very proud. He always said Sophia was going to be amazing. He was right. 1 year after Flight 237, Sophia stood in the auditorium of the International Aviation Safety Organization in Montreal. She was giving a presentation to hundreds of professional pilots and aeronautical engineers from around the world. The lesson from Flight 237, she told the assembled crowd, is that preparedness matters. My father taught me to think beyond standard procedures. He taught that unlikely scenarios deserve preparation because when they happen, the prepared will survive. The auditorium erupted in applause. After her presentation, aviation safety officials approached Sophia with an offer to establish the Ricardo Martinez Memorial Aviation Safety Program, a program to develop new training protocols based on her insights about preparedness for unlikely scenarios. That night, in her hotel room, Sophia looked up at the stars and whispered, "Thank you, Papa. Thank you for teaching me everything. I finally understand why you made me practice those impossible scenarios so many times. I promise you, I'm going to use everything you taught me to help others. I'm going to become the pilot you always said I would be." And somewhere, in whatever form love and memory take, Lieutenant Colonel Ricardo Martinez was smiling. The impossible had become possible. The girl who learned to fly in simulators with her father had flown a real airplane in the most dangerous way imaginable. And in doing so, she had not only saved 215 lives, she had saved her own life, giving it purpose and meaning.